Hello and welcome back to Content is for Closers. Today we're going to talk about creative constraint. And when you think about constraints, our initial reaction is typically one against that idea. We want freedom to think, freedom to act, freedom to create. But unlimited freedom isn't always the best thing for us. In fact, unlimited freedom creates worse environments sometimes than healthy constraints would have otherwise. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Without further ado, here's my co-host, Carlton Riffle, on thriving under creative restraint. Carlton, hello.
Welcome to the podcast. That was quite the monologue, Adam.
Is it as something I thought we'd try out? Just mix it up a little bit.
Good. I feel inspired now to put constraints on myself.
Monologue, but yeah, I thought we would mix it up a little bit.
I feel like in the spirit of this episode that we were gonna do this episode with our eyes closed, just to try something different.
I feel like our talent and lack thereof, also our proximity to one another, like we live under enough constraint naturally.
Constraints.
Yeah, that just making this is a feat.
That's a low blow right there. Just your
that's true.
Your creative constraint is your lack of talent.
Is how bad you are.
Yeah. First thing, I just no. There's so many different directions we could go with this. Like, I think this is a great topic because most people think that creativity is actually a lack of something, right? Like that's our initial thought. We think I can't be creative because I don't have the idea. And really, sometimes what you have to do is you have to take handcuffs and put them on yourself and actually make it harder for yourself to come up with something. And in doing so, you're going to make it easier on yourself to come up with ideas. So I think we've got some structure here, but we can kind of just go back and forth.
I would be curious, like, what are some of the handcuffs that come to mind that you as a creator have encountered or that you've seen other people encounter when it comes to content specifically?
Yeah, it's especially if you're like me and you sometimes procrastinate. I think time can become one of those big constraints. We don't necessarily think of it as a constraint. We think of it as a deadline. But that's really like if we had all year to come up with an idea, sometimes I don't know that we'd come up with a better idea. We might come up with more ideas or might come up with a different idea that's maybe more involved. But sometimes that constraint of having a deadline and just saying it's going to be done by this date, that just forces us to come up with something. That's kind of like your most traditional one that everyone has to operate inside of, right?
What's a realistic, just within that, what's a realistic way? Okay, so like if you have a job and you have a deadline, that's obvious. But like what's a realistic way? You've done this, I feel like, a million different ways you've attacked this. What's something that you found that's worked when it comes to time constraint? Like I think you've tried Pomodoro at certain times.
Yeah.
Any of those specifically?
Yeah. So Pomodoro specifically is like 30-minute increments, right? And so I don't know why it is, but because it means tomato, and I think in Italian.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's like the tomato timers. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, well, that's why.
I have no clue, and somebody else fill us in if we're wrong. But I do think that there is something to giving yourself artificial deadlines, and then like we've talked about this before, like saying it publicly, right? Like saying I'm going to have this by X date, and and kind of help hold me accountable, right? So I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is like if you take what you have to do and you break it into little pieces, and each of those pieces can kind of represent a day or an hour, and you find a way to essentially set those deadlines so that there are more deadlines or more time-based deadlines for each of those little pieces. That can be another way that you can get things done with having a little bit of accountability. Like I think outside of time, so that's the one that everyone kind of has. Like we're going to launch this podcast episode next week, right? It's a reoccurring deadline that happens on a weekly basis. But I think you can also go a lot of different directions. And I think that's where we want to spend most of our time, is talking about like how can our format of content, or how can some of the things that we choose, and maybe even the audience doesn't even know about, like they might be totally clueless as to the constraints.
Okay, we talked about run us through some of them.
Yeah, like if you compare this to poetry, like iambic pentameter, that's a constraint, right?
Explain that for the non me.
If you did not have a liberal arts education, yeah. I unfortunately I don't have a good enough memory to like quote something in iambic pentameter, but it's like
I'd be
kind of
so
that
impressed.
rhythmic. Yeah, I should have prepared that a little better. Um, quote, yeah, let's just start quoting Shakespeare. I don't even know if Shakespeare wrote in iambic pentameter. I'm
But
sure
it's
for
basically
something,
like numbered verses, right? It's
yeah,
like
it's a
beats.
rhythm,
Yeah.
right? Haiku, that's another one. People will write in a haiku. And by giving yourself that creative constraint, you're essentially making the format, something that you're choosing ahead of time. It might be kind of arbitrary, but you're going to say that I'm gonna stick with this, right?
Hmm.
So I think in content, yeah, you can have a haiku, like, or you can do some of those poetic devices, but more along, especially now with video, I think you can find ways to pick topics or pick things that will you're going to say in this specific episode or in this specific video clip, I'm going to let's just pick a random thing. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to talk about a success story that we've had. The moment that you make that decision, then you've created a constraint for yourself. And now
Yeah.
the game is smaller. Now that you can actually like look around that room and have some sort of like objective to go back to.
Hmm. Yeah, real quick on the rhythm thing and on the constraint of that timing. We were with some friends a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about our different like religious backgrounds and upbringings. And
Yeah.
one of the girls said, "Oh, well, I grew up in a very legalistic home," and I was like, "Oh, really? Tell me about that." Classic Andrew Warner question. Tell me about that. And she was like, "Well, the things that she described to me were not super legalistic." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And she was like, "What about you?" And I was like, "Well, I grew up in like very conservative, blah, blah, blah. For instance, like syncopation was a problem, and obstruct." And they were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." The whole room
Wait,
stopped, and they're like, "What is syncopation? What are you talking about?" I was like, "You guys know, like the second and the fourth beat, and blah blah blah." And they're like, "No, no, no, we've never heard of any of this." What are you talking about? And I was like, oh, I forgot how small that world is sometimes. But
yeah,
anyway, just
yeah.
funny.
But iambic pentameter was totally okay.
That's right.
You
That's
did,
right. And,
yeah,
and downstrumming without upstrumming. Anyway, I knew you'd appreciate that, but
yeah, I do.
the timing thing
Well,
got me.
well, I think one of the first times that I was confronted with this as an actual idea was when I was in school, and I'll try to find the best way to tell this because it can get into nitty gritty details. But
The nitty gritty.
essentially, yeah, essentially, I was a comic artist for a newspaper, and that newspaper had some creative constraints, and one of those creative constraints was that it had to be approved, right? That the
Which is
content of this,
probably true of every comic
yeah,
newspaper to some degree. Yeah.
to some degree. You couldn't just have like all out craziness. Well, I was kind of infamous for coming up with cartoons that would not pass that approval process, right?
Right.
And so there was a time at which I sat down with the editor in charge and just had a very frank discussion saying like, look, you know, I'm coming up with these ideas. I think they're hilarious, but apparently they're crossing some sort of line, right?
Mhm.
And the editor told me, they said sometimes that creative constraint can help you become more creative instead of
Mhm.
less creative.
Mhm.
And while I didn't appreciate the fact that I had to redo some of these cartoons, I did take that lesson and take that application and really think about that when it came to other things in life, like art or things that I
Yeah.
was even doing that were outside of the visual creative realm. Because when you do place yourself under that, our tendency is to look at it and hate it instead
Yep.
of look at it as an opportunity.
Dude, I mean, as a consumer, and obviously a lot of this is we're right now tying it to like whether it be rules or regulations or more, but I think even outside of that realm, when you look at comedy, like I'm a huge fan of comedy, and there's something Kevin Hart, like young Kevin Hart, I really enjoyed his stand-up pieces and his monologues and things like that. And then there came a point where he just, regardless of what you think about it, he just became like, okay, the whole thing is profanity, right? So like maybe you like profanity, maybe you don't. But to me, it took some of the teeth of the humor out of it because it was so reliant on trying to get a reaction by using a certain like a certain word that's gonna
Yeah.
get a and it wasn't like the actual concept. It was, let me just find different ways to say this curse word. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's an example where it's like, of course you have the freedom to do whatever when you're in that environment, but if constraining yourself to some degree might have actually made the content and the quality better. So that's like, I'd say we covered a couple there: timing, and then maybe like societal or cultural
Yeah.
constraints within whatever organization you're in. Another one I wanted to ask you about, I don't remember if this is on the list or not, but what about like um, creative feedback and
Mm,
constraint of the opinions of others that you're working with? And the
yeah.
example I'm thinking of is we did a video for really good emails. And you remember we went through that process, and the first, I think we did like 5 iterations for it. And the first, after the third, we felt like it was really good and probably got annoyed with the amount of feedback we got at some point. But I'd be curious from your perspective, do you think the final product ended up better as a result of, the continual feedback and refinement there? Or like, do you think that made it harder for you to create?
Yeah, this is a perfect example because the creative constraint that they were putting on us was really related to two things. One was music, having like certain beats happen in a certain way, and then the other one was related to animation. And so with both of those, it's a perfect example of there being unlimited options, right? Like,
Hmm.
so kind of to bring this and compare it to other ways that we can get creative and have these constraints is thinking about style. They wanted it to have a certain style,
Mm,
and so that became a constraint in their feedback that allowed me to kind of narrow things down and
yeah.
make some selections. And then the other thing was it was collaborative, right? So not only were they the ones that were the owners of this video and representing their event, but they wanted to see my creativity and they were trusting my creativity to play a part in it as well. And
Hmm.
so in some ways, like each of these are their own versions of a constraint that I think made that video better. And
Yeah.
even though like some of those initial rounds were a bit of a struggle because you're trying to figure out like, oh, I thought this hit the mark and apparently it doesn't. So let's try to refactor this, but not just do like one or two tweaks. Let's try to think about it from a completely different angle. And
Right.
that different angle was the creative constraint.
Yeah. What about some of the more hard, I don't know if you'd call them hard, but we've talked about like style, timing,
Yeah.
some of those things. What about things like a specific system, or you even had, I think in the list, you had something about numbers,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah. So
didn't fully
numeric.
understand that.
So if
Numeric,
I'm
yeah.
going to say, like, if I come to this and I say, when we present our options to you, I'm actually going to have three options for you. That's
Oh, I
that's
see.
how simple it can be, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna actually give you the choice of a few different logo options, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I've got two that are pretty good, but I've got to have a third. And I've
Hmm.
honestly had projects where my third or the last thing that you created has been the best one because you're forcing yourself to come up with something.
Hmm.
And I think this other like one thing that we almost never think about, but it's like an incredible constraint, is the idea of play. And I didn't put this on the list, but it came to mind in the last thing we were talking about. If we say we're just going to play, or we're going to do a test, or we're going
Hmm.
to kind of like run through this for pretend, right? Like all of those are ways of doing something and kind of creating this constraint that's actually saying this is not the real thing,
Hmm.
and in doing so we can kind of formulate and get prepared for the actual real thing.
So a lot of those are very specific, very like, on the nose, do this many, do it in
Yeah.
this amount of time, use this style. What about swinging to the opposite side? Like if, and I want, I have a specific example in mind, so I hope you choose it, but, uh, of total randomness, where
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
you don't know what it is that's going to be spit out
Yeah.
at you, but you have to respond to it.
Yeah. So like this is one that actually helped me come up with this episode, which is essentially randomness itself. Like randomness can be a constraint. So you create a list of things and you say whatever is picked, that is the thing that I'm going to do.
Tell them about
Um,
Scramble.
Yeah, so I think we may have mentioned it before on here, but I made a simple app. It's at scramble.land. And essentially, it's just that whole concept where you put in lists of things, and then every week at a certain time, it will send you an email with that thing for that list. So the dinner that you're going to make this week on Thursday is X, and it will just pick. So I think that can be another one. We just made a simple list in ClickUp that has, I think we're working towards a larger number, but right now it's got like 70 something items in it that are content ideas. And it just selects one of those every single day and assigns it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think there's these powerful, even just the idea of randomness can be a powerful way to make sure that you're, in some ways having this, like you're not just sitting down and trying to think of any idea off the top of your head. You've got a prompt, and that prompt will help you get to the next step.
I think that's something we should publish and make available to everyone. Like we should,
Yeah.
once that list is 100 or even at 70, we should just put it on a page like you did with scramble.land and let people come to it and be told what asset they need to create or what type of content they need to create.
Yeah.
I do think it's a great point. So much of, I think that constraint in our modern society is rare. So much of our parents' generations and before that had like necessary constraint, like you had to go to an office, or you had to sit at a desk, or you had to be limited with a budget or whatever. And so much of our society today is of excess that we don't struggle with some of those things. And so when we're able to be self-aware enough to put this constraint on us, it allows us to create better. It allows us to be more productive as a result. If somebody was trying to think through how to actually implement some of these things, we've given like a lot of different types of examples.
Yeah.
How would you start to think about that?
Yeah. So obviously your medium itself is a constraint. And I think that there are things within that medium or media that will help you make further decisions. Because really, at the end of the day, every decision you make is narrowing down into a more concrete thing that will get you to the end result. So with a podcast, and in particular, because we're on a podcast, or with a video episodic, show of some sort, you've got your niche. You've got these things that you kind of know your audience is dialed into. But even within that, there can be segments, and agreeing to do those segments or kind of the format of those segments, those can be constraints that put you that help you create something. So if you think about it in general terms, you're going to say, I'm going to come up with a segment that helps me get to know my guests better, or I'm going to come up with a segment that helps me and the audience connect on a deeper level or build trust. And so just make an arbitrary decision about one of those things and then see what comes up. Say if we're going to do 30 seconds or a minute of something, what could that be? And how could that look? And by pretending that, like, and going down that route of, hey, this is a constraint that we've developed for ourselves, you'll be surprised at some of the things you'll come up with.
Yeah, there's a show called Invest Like the Best. It's Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and he has a question at the end of every episode, regardless of who he's asking or interviewing, and he asks, "What's the nicest thing someone's done for you?" And it's this very broad question, and the response is, it's the best part of the show, because the responses range from a grandmother who raised somebody when their parents were unavailable or out of the picture to, the FTC chair coming to our company and helping us out when we were a startup and like giving us advice. Just random, crazy responses. And it has very little to do with investing, really. But it's the kind of the golden nugget of the show that he has made a part of it, because he just asks every single week.
Yeah, it becomes the soul to some degree, the personality. Yeah. No, that's cool. So in your life, Adam, do you have any constraints that you kind of practice or you put on yourself?
Yeah. I was joking a little bit at the beginning, but I do think that our setup, I don't think if you were looking at it, 5.5 years ago and you're like, okay, how do you build a successful agency? Well, let's put one of the partners not living in the same city as the others. Let's do everything remotely, despite being a pretty small company. Like in my mind, if I had just complete reign over every decision, we'd all be working together in an office somewhere every single day. Just the energy that comes out of that, the ideas that come out of that. That's like what I would prefer, right?
But hoops that's just, we can play.
Yeah, seriously, the cultural stuff, like when there's a pit, like last night, I had a meeting with a new opportunity yesterday morning. Worked on their proposal last night. I woke up at 4:30 this morning to work on it more because I had meetings today, and I really want to get it turned out. Like that would be more fun if we were all doing that and like ordered pizza. You know what I mean? Like so yeah, I think that is just a reality and a constraint. I think we are completely self-funded. We've never had any outside money or investment, even like debt. And that's probably not smart from a business perspective. Like I think we have places to learn there, but that constraint has caused us to run we have to be cash flow positive in order for us to exist. So we always have been. Things like that. I think even just the size of our company, we service, I don't know, over 30 companies a year. And we have 6 people. So, we punch quite a bit above our weight just by the number of people we have. So, I mean, there's flip sides to all of those things, right? All those things are advantages as well. But if you ask constraints, I think those are some of the initial ones that have come to mind.
Yeah. How about your personal life? I feel like you're the king of like placing random things on yourself that torture you, and
like my walking. What do you mean?
Yeah, or your no, like for your 30th birthday, you ran. Was it 30 miles or?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a constraint necessarily, but
yeah. I mean, it's a promise to yourself. I guess it's
yeah,
that does kind of fall into that a challenge, because I do think a lot of this is like you're almost creating this artificial challenge. Like, do these things have to exist? Probably not. But by putting your brain in that, like in those handcuffs, it's just in brain cuffs. Mm-hmm. It kind of just forces you to think of something in a different, or view it in a different light. There's a novel. I can't remember. I'll have to find the name of it. Apparently it's like winning all these awards right now. But I was
What's it about?
It's a man in Russia, and he's in house arrest.
Gentleman in Moscow?
A Gentleman in Moscow, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book.
So do you know the constraint that's in that book, Adam?
Well, I think he went against the Soviets, I guess, and then he gets put into a hotel, right? He's not allowed to leave the ground of the hotel.
House arrest is a hotel. Well, the way that author composed that book, he actually started with a timing constraint where this is like not in the way that we think of timing, where it's a deadline. But he actually said, I'm going to tell this one day, or maybe it was 1 hour, and then the next part is going to be 2 hours, or it basically would double. So, and then it would be a day, and then it would be 2 days. And then he basically went through telling the story all the way till 14 years, and then reversed it and went all the way back in the way that he wrote the text. So that's an incredible constraint. Like you think about a novel.
You're talking about the narrative, like the chronology of the story starts with 1 day, 2 days, 4 days, 8 days. Yeah. I read the book, and it does go out, like you said, probably 14, 15 years. But I didn't know that was intentional.
And then he reverses it so that you're like having this arc that feels like now we've watched all this time pass, and then it ends with a very personal, like close up,
that's cool
in the moment. So I thought that was an interesting version of it, where this author has he just decided that would be an awesome way to tell a story. And so he put that constraint on himself at the very beginning.
I think another no, that's pretty modern. But another example is when Casey Neistat decided he was going to vlog every day.
Yeah.
And I think he did it for like 2.5 or 3 years. Wow. And he literally published a YouTube video every single day, which we couldn't do one of these every single day for that many years. I mean, really, I can't fathom the work that went into that when you talk about the heavy constraint, but it's interesting. I mean, it's like you hear him talk now. I heard him on an interview not long ago, and he was saying how that 2.5 or 3 years was pretty terrible and he did not enjoy it, but he literally doesn't work now. And it's not because he's sick of work necessarily, but it's like he just that had such an impact on his career, and he still gets millions of views every month on YouTube. And so then he gets paid, an extraordinary amount of money. And so now he's just sort of taking a sabbatical for several years. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see the other side of that, of the heavy constraint, and then sort of the, the release afterwards.
Yeah. So kind of to just overview, we talked about really just the idea of constraints, and we've talked about time, format, topic, method. I think some of those are similar to each other. Stylistic constraints, collaborative, so working with other people, having challenges for yourself, having numeric constraints, systematic constraints, which I guess all of these are kind of systematic, and then having using randomness. Um, so within your content, I would challenge everyone here. Think of just some arbitrary constraint, or
Mm.
if you're struggling to come up with ideas, maybe even just take a minute to not look at inspiration. I think sometimes we start there and say, for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to write, and that's my constraint. I'm going to write without looking towards anything or trying to even find like somebody else who's done it like how I want to do it, but just saying for the next independent 20 minutes, I'm going to, focus on doing everything myself, writing everything myself. That's another example of just something that you can do to start your creative gears turning.
Yeah, and I would dumb it down even further. Like if you're like, I don't know what the constraint should be, make something for the next 30 days. We've done this a few times on this show. We've done it with our blog. We've done it across a few areas of our business, but it could also be a sales thing. Make a new sales inquiry for 30 days. But whatever your action is, whatever your creative output is, do it every single day for the next 30 days. I'm talking every single day, Saturday, Sunday, like, the whole thing. And I think that will change the way that you think about creation, and it'll just also form a pretty solid habit as well.
Yeah, that's great, man. I think that's it for me. If you don't have anything else, we could. Do you want to try to do our tweet of the week? Do you have any tweets queued up? I can go.
Yeah, go ahead. I have to pull it up here.
Yeah, so this one's a little bit about business. So this is Theo Ohene or Ohen. And he basically, it just really caught me that this is such a like dead simple business technique. But he said Tinder, Slack, and Spotify all have this one thing in common, and it's a high free to paid conversion rate. So here's 5 dead simple tips. That's a thread. Forgive me. 5 dead simple tips to convert more users to customers. And so it's almost less about the thread, because he does have some good, numbers in here. He talks about it being really a conversion rate is like a good conversion rate is 2 to 5%. So it kind of sets some expectations. But he just basically is talking about like limiting some of the freemium features, and then also kind of having a timely offer to upgrade, like it comes right when they need it. And then the last one, which I thought was interesting, was like stop like just hounding people to upgrade all the time, or don't make it so, it's like the opposite, right? Don't make it so annoying to use the free product that people just don't like the product at all. Like you can use Spotify and use it, with most of its features. But there's a point where if you want to be like a long-term user of it, or if you want to have everything there and not be bugged by ads, that you're going to naturally go to that upgrade.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just thought it was a clever tweet talking about product and how you can kind of capture people with that freemium model and then kind of ease them into more of a paid option.
Yeah, that's great. It was a tweet treat. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Tweet treat.
Thank you.
Mine, listen, it's the end of summer. Next week is Labor Day. We got a few more weeks of the sunshine down here in the South, at least. So our good friend, Mickey Cloud, friend of the show, former guest, probably future guest as well. He had this tweet on Saturday that I don't know why it resonated with me, but I think it'll send people off into the Labor Day weekend well. He said, "Today, the lovely Mrs. and I took the kids, 1 for donuts, 2 to the car wash, 3 to dad's office, 4 to the recycling center, 5 to the grocery store, 6 homemade lunch. While his wife, takes a deserved nap with our 2 and 4-year-old, I mowed the lawn, and we have now earned this upcoming pool time." I don't know why I was like, that tweet made me nostalgic for right now. That doesn't even make sense as an oxymoron, but it was a good reminder for me and to take advantage of kind of these last few weeks of summer and just enjoy some of the normal things. So hopefully if you're listening to this, you've got some good Labor Day plans and we'll be able to enjoy them as well. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.